Good morning. This is Ryan Bast of the Motor Safety Association presenting a webinar on hiring contractors. And this webinar is the 21st webinar we've done in series with the Western Equipment Dealers Association. And as we roll into this morning's webinar, the items that we will go over today are a brief introduction to hiring contractors. I'll go through some common definitions utilized when speaking to hiring contractors. We'll go through the step-by-step process of hiring a contractor. We'll touch on supply-only contracts as well as delivery contracts. We'll touch a bit on the residential contractor as well as hired equipment contractor, and conclude with an action item list this morning. So who is the Motor Safety Association? So the Motor Safety Association is a nonprofit safety association in Saskatchewan that looks after the safety of any business that sells or services anything with an engine or steering wheel. So instead of me telling you too much more about our association, as you can see by the items listed on the slide of the various services we conduct, I encourage you to check out our website, www.motorsafety.ca, to find out more. And as I ease into the introduction this morning, some businesses think that by having the contractor put their name on the sign-in sheet at the front desk, it is clearing the contractor to work at your facility. And this is a myth. All that sign-in sheet does is tell you who is on site for visitors, guests, and contractors if in the event you had an emergency drill, so you have a record of who is on site. So the sign-in sheet does not clear contractors to work at your facility. If you were to hire a contractor who is not registered with the WCB, they are considered to be your worker, and then you must report and pay premiums based on their contract labor. So those are some of the main topics that we will be going over in the webinar today. I want you to take a look at this slide. Have you ever hired any of the following types of contractors? And you can see by the list here, there are various businesses that do occasionally, I would see at farm equipment dealerships, these businesses do attend and do a lot of work on site for dealerships. And if a worker from one of these businesses were to suffer an injury while on your site, it will come out of your WCB account if they do not have coverage. And this situation actually happened to an automotive dealership. They hired a contractor to do some exterior painting on the outside of their dealership wall. And that painter fell off of some scaffolding and was severely hurt and airlifted to the Regina General Hospital. So every medical cost to treat that contractor, the transportation cost for the air ambulance, and the loss of wages all came out of that dealership's WCB account because they did not ensure that the contractor had WCB coverage when they started the process of bringing that contractor onto their facility. So by this list on the screen, I just want you to either check with your accounts payable records if there's any contractors that I missed on here that you may work with at your facility, and encourage you to go through the process of clearing these contractors when you do hire them onto your facility. And I'm going to go into that process here this morning. But as I get started to speak to section 2, when it comes to definitions, it is very important that we speak the same language. And so I will start off with some common definitions utilized when hiring contractors. So the person who hires the contractor to carry out work or services and issues the payment is the principal. So if I were the person to hire the contractor, I would be the principal. The contractor would then carry out the work or services when hired by the principal. So the principal is the one who hires the contractor to carry out work or services as hired by the principal. There's also a subcontractor, and subcontractors are hired by the contractor to carry out work for the contractor that was initially hired by the principal. So essentially, if I, the principal, hired a contractor to do some work on my facility, and the contractor wasn't able to do everything that I required, he or she may seek out the help of a specialized subcontractor to take care of that work that the original contractor wasn't able to fulfill. So contractors hire subcontractors that come on site and work for the contractor. And then there is the prime contractor. And the prime contractor is generally, it's somewhat of a new definition within the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations. And what happens was on a construction site, there were various groups of contractors. Some would be wearing hard hats, some would be wearing ball caps, and they were all playing by different safety rules. So what a prime contractor does is it overlooks all contractors and subcontractors to ensure that they are following a set of common safety rules and holding to a standard. So we generally see this in place on construction sites, and the prime contractor is the person with the most authority on those sites. But why I brought this up was sometimes businesses, they expand their dealership or their facilities, and they may build a new building or add on to an existing building, therefore having the need to have a prime contractor. Then there's the letter of good standing. And that letter of good standing informs the principal if the contractor has a WCB account and their premiums are paid up to date. And then the clearance letter, that is obtained from the WCB after contract work is completed but before payment is made. And this is important because sometimes contractor status change from the start of the contract till when the work is completed. And there's also another term which goes in conjunction with the clearance letter, and it's just an extension of the clearance letter. It's called a term clearance letter. And the term clearance is good for an entire quarter or 3-month period. So instead of having businesses having to provide that clearance letter for whenever a contract has been completed, sometimes larger businesses qualify for a term clearance, which is good for 3 months, and they can reuse that existing clearance letter for a 3-month period. Let's jump into section 3, hiring a contractor. And this section will go through the process of hiring a contractor. The first step being, do your research and hire the correct contractor for the work required. You may want to also check to see if that contractor is core certified and what their safety record or injury rate is before hiring them. And then you would like to obtain a letter of good standing from the WCB. But either the principal or the contractor can contact the WCB to obtain a letter of good standing. And that letter of good standing is issued before work begins and tells the principal if the contractor has a WCB account and whether or not they are in good standing with the WCB. And that letter is only valid for the day it was issued. Because what happens is it may occur that a contractor's WCB account changes from if it's in good standing and to if it becomes out of good standing based on various reasons, such as not paid premiums. So keep in mind that letter is only valid for the day it was issued. And some businesses believe that if they obtain a letter of good standing once a year and keep it on file, they are duly diligent, but they are not, as these letters are only good for the day that they were issued. So once we've done our research and obtained that letter of good standing, and we've brought that contractor onto our site, what we have to do now is orientate that contractor and review our safe rules and policies with them. So at this point, if sometimes businesses may also utilize a contractor handbook or a liability disclaimer form or a contractor acknowledgement form, and that is okay. You can utilize these forms. They're not a substitute for obtaining a letter of good standing, but there are certain forms that you can use to orientate and educate your contractor. And as a bonus for the attendees of today's webinar, I have all the various templates for contractor handbooks and contractor acknowledgement forms that I can send to you after the webinar if you require them. So once you've orientated your contractor, the contractor would then complete the services or work for you that you initially hired them for. So that would be the next step. So once again, that contractor has received that letter of good standing, and you've orientated them, and they can now complete all the work or services that you requested. Once that work is completed, it is the principal's responsibility to ensure a clearance letter is obtained from the WCB. However, either the contractor or the principal can obtain this letter. So then the contractor would attach the clearance letter to the invoice for the principal. So if the contractor was the one that obtained that clearance letter, they can attach it to the invoice. Or when the invoice comes in, the principal can attach the clearance letter to the invoice. But just keep in mind, that is the next step, getting that clearance letter from the WCB. An example would be for if the principal were to pay this contractor for the work that was completed and their account was not in good standing and they did not obtain this clearance letter, you, the principal, would receive a financial penalty from the WCB. And I will touch on that here a bit later. So it is important to follow this process and obtain that clearance letter before issuing payment. But once, like I said, the contractor completes the work and they provide you with their invoice and the clearance letter, you can pay the contractor and you're done. And the process is completed. But if the contractor cannot provide that clearance letter based on various reasons, so if their WCB account is not up to date, the WCB will then ask the principal to withhold payment. So if I, the principal, hired a contractor and I'm in the process of paying that contractor, but their status does not come back as cleared, the WCB can instruct me, the principal, to withhold payment from the contractor. And this is generally a 3-week period. And during that 3-week period, the contractor has every opportunity to bring their WCB account status up to date. So if the contractor does not bring their account up to date, the WCB will request the principal to remit payment on behalf of the contractor. So the principal will then pay the WCB this money first in an effort to bring the contractor's WCB account up to date. So an example scenario would be if I, the principal, owed a contractor $1,000 for doing work on my site or facility, and if the contractor's WCB account was not up to date, say they owed $300 to the WCB for unpaid premiums, that contractor has 3 weeks to bring their WCB account up to date. And if the contractor does not bring their account up to date, the principal would then pay the $300 to the WCB to bring the contractor's account up to date, and the other $700 to the contractor. So again, as I mentioned before, if the principal decides to skip this step and just pay the contractor, and they do not check to see if the contractor's WCB account has been cleared or not, the principal will then get a penalty fee assessed to them by the WCB. So that's how that process works when hiring contractors. In Saskatchewan, we're fortunate because the WCB has an automatic clearance verification database. And this is a program that principals can utilize for when they hire contractors. They can upload a list of their commonly used contractors into this database, and they receive a contact email whenever the status of these contractors change. So this would be a great system for people to take advantage of to ensure that their contractors are always cleared. So I encourage you to check with the local WCB in your province if they do offer a very similar system for managing contractors. And as I conclude this here section, some other thoughts to touch on about hiring a contractor are if WCB account holders, including contractors, pay premiums based on actual payroll for the prior year and estimated payroll for the current year. So that's applicable to all contractors and all businesses. They need to pay premiums based on actual payroll for the prior year and estimated payroll for the current year. And this generally occurs in April and in September. But what happens is payroll can be revised at any time throughout the year, which could result in additional due dates for premiums. So if there is a revision due to an estimate, it could affect the contractor status. So that I just can't assume that if premiums are due in April, if I obtain a letter of good standing in May, it's going to be good for the year. Because that's truly not the case, because these numbers are based on estimates and they can be changed any time throughout the year. And a contractor's account will go into default or not in good standing if premiums are not paid by the due date. So what I also have that I will provide to everyone after this webinar is I have a hiring a contractor step-by-step checklist that I will send out, which will give you a step-by-step checklist to assist you in the process of hiring contractors, which will hopefully give you some guidance and a bit of a checklist to follow. Section 4 speaks to supply-only contracts. And supply-only contracts do not require WCB contractor clearances. For example, they are supplying you with a service while carrying work out at their facility. So the contractor is providing a service at their facility. So if I'm getting my tractor fixed at your dealership or my car painted at an auto body shop, they are contractors to me. They are carrying the work out at their facility, so therefore no clearances are required. Section 5 speaks to delivery contracts. And if delivery is part of the arrangement when purchasing from a contractor, then WCB clearance is not required. An example would be if I order parts from a supplier and the delivery is negotiated with the arrangement, and say if that driver of the delivery truck was hurt while on my site, it would not be my WCB claim, as delivery was part of the arrangement with that contractor. So another example or scenario for a delivery contract would be if I hire a company to manage my coverall inventory. So they would bring clean coveralls and remove dirty coveralls from my dealership. That would be an example of a delivery contract. So since delivery is part of the price that I pay for the coveralls, no contractor clearances would be required. But what if it doesn't work that way? And what if that delivery is not a part of the contract and you're still getting items delivered? So if the principal or myself ordered an item and hired a third-party delivery company, myself, the principal, would need to clear that delivery company as they are now my contractor. So if the third-party courier or delivery was injured on my site, it would be my WCB claim if that third party does not have adequate WCB coverage. And how the WCB determines this contractor relationship is they look at the money for who is paying who, and that tells them who the contractor is and who the principal is. So to put this in another scenario or an example, if I were to hire a hotshot 24/7 transporter company to pick up a part that I really need from a wrecker and transport it to my dealership, the dealer would be the principal and that transporter company would be the contractor because I'm paying that transporter company for a service. And if that contractor would then need to go through the same process of being cleared and led the letters of good standing because I have hired them to do that delivery, and that would be how that delivery contract process works. The next section, residential contractors, is section 6. And residential is exempt from WCB legislation. Homeowners is what I'm referring to as residential. But some homeowners do select optional WCB coverage and go through the process of obtaining letters of good standing and clearing those contractors to conduct work at their home. And they do this because if a contractor is hurt, the contractor could sue me, the homeowner, which would come out of my homeowner's liability insurance. Therefore, that would cause an increase to my premiums and a reduction to my discount that I pay for my homeowner's insurance. So an example would be if I'm hiring a contractor to repair my garage door, and if that contractor were to get hurt at my facility, they could sue me, the homeowner, which would then come out of my homeowner's insurance, as I mentioned before, therefore increasing my premiums, reducing my discount. So to protect themselves, some homeowners have chosen to select optional WCB coverage. And if they do that, they would pay a fee to the WCB to have this WCB coverage. But by doing so, they have formally become the principal, and for the contractor, they would need to obtain that letter of good standing and the clearance letter and follow that process of clearing the contractors if in the event they were to carry this task out at their residential site. So that's a little bit of how that residential contractor process works for your information. The next section is hiring equipment contracts. And for hired equipment, that's pertaining to major industrial grade equipment used to fulfill the terms of a contract for which the homeowner of the equipment is being paid. For example, graders, welders on trucks, steam cleaning, sewer trucks or sandblasting, semi-tractors or custom tractors, combines, and tow trucks. Those are all various examples of hired equipment. So by hired equipment, if myself, the principal, were to entertain the fact of hiring a contractor and for the contractor to carry out their work, this equipment would be part of the contract. So they would fall under hired equipment because they're using this equipment to carry out the contract for the principal. But the same rules apply. So if this hired equipment is involved in a contract and the equipment owner does not have a WCB account, they would deem to be a worker of the principal. So sometimes employers are aware that when they do hire equipment operators, those equipment operators do not have the WCB coverage, but they choose to hire them anyway because they may need that certain work done or specialty work. And in those situations, the principal covers the contractor as one of their employees. So say if I needed that windrower delivered on that slide, on this picture, and if I were to hire this trucking company, and I know fully well that they do not have WCB coverage, I choose to cover that contractor as one of my workers. And by doing so, I have the right to deduct those WCB premiums from the contractor before I pay them. But when I do this, the principal, myself, must then report the amount of the contract labor on my payroll statement for the WCB. So I can, in fact, bring in contractors that do not have WCB coverage, and I can charge them for the WCB premiums, and as long as I submit that information on my payroll statement. So kind of an example that I can utilize for this scenario for hiring equipment would be if a principal is hiring a contractor that has a welder on their truck and they come and do welding for me on my site. The principal is hiring the equipment and the operator. And if that contractor does not have a WCB account, the principal would then have to cover the contractor for the WCB coverage and report this additional payroll on their WCB statement. So again, this is possible to do if you do not have a contractor without WCB coverage, and you, the principal, can cover the contractor for those premiums, and it is your right to charge back those premiums or deduct them from the contractor's invoice. So that's how that section works for hiring equipment contracts. As we hit section 8 on action items, I mentioned earlier that all attendees will receive a copy of a hiring contractor safe work policy, guidelines for contractor safety form, this contractor safety acknowledgement form, a liability form, safety handbook, as well as the step-by-step checklist for hiring the contractor's process. And what I want to clearly mention is these forms and policies and handbooks and checklists are not a substitute for obtaining a letter of good standing and clearances from the WCB. They merely are documents to help you formalize and manage your contractors that you bring into your facility. And if you are watching this webinar after the fact, and this is on YouTube, feel free to contact me, which I'll provide an email at the end of this webinar for our members if they are looking for these samples. So I encourage you to take action and challenge yourself on managing contractors within your dealership or business. And the first step is just to do your research. Make sure that you hire the right contractor for the job. Be sure to orientate and train them and clear them before issuing payment. So follow that process that we spoke to earlier in the webinar. And check with your local WCB to register for online services and familiarize yourself with the contractor legislation in your province. And if you do have a WCB system to manage your contractors, such as we do in Saskatchewan, the automatic clearance verification process, I encourage you to sign up and take advantage of that, because that will help you manage your contractors. And train and communicate with staff on the information in today's webinar on hiring contractors. And this is important because what if a contractor somehow slips through the cracks and they weren't cleared to come to your facility? So if your staff can identify that, oh, there's a contractor working back here, will they go and ask the contractor if they've been properly cleared, or would they go to the supervisor and just to follow up to ensure that that contractor is cleared and just not wandering around working at your facility? So the more people know about this process, it'll be another check and balance to help you ensure that the contractors are adequately cleared that are working on your site. At the end of the webinar, the attendees will also receive a webinar certificate that they can fill their name into and print and save for their records. and there's also a short survey with feedback. So I encourage you to offer me feedback on the thoughts of today's webinar, and I'm always welcoming future topics because these topics are used to give you the best webinar that you're looking for. So if a topic of interest comes to mind, I encourage you to send it to me so I can present a webinar on that topic. So that concludes the webinar this morning on hiring contractors. If you do have any questions or would like further assistance, my number is on the slide here, as well as our email address and our website. Our next webinar is marked for December 14th. And again, we are always looking for those topics. So feel free to provide those topics that we can provide a webinar for. So with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time and joining me this morning for the webinar on hiring contractors. Thank you.